But on the line right now is a noted filmsman, all right, somebody that knows the game, knows how to break it down, and you should experience the new look of Inquirer Sports where fans can read, watch, and listen to their favorite reporters and columnists. Go to Inquirer.com/sports. Mr. E.J. Smith on the Comcast Business Hotline. How you doing today, E.J.?
Doing well, Tyron. Thanks for having me, man.
No, thanks for coming on. First thing I have to ask you, now we heard a lot of things about how the Rams were different and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately Saquon Barkley, I want to start there because, again, we're going to start with the positives on this show. How is Saquon Barkley able to get 200 yards against them again after we heard so much from the national media and the local L.A. media about how they were different against the run and all this was going to be different? How was he able to pull it off again?
You know, it's funny because going into the regular season matchup between these teams, we heard about how the Rams, were on a winning streak. They hadn't lost very many games. So it was a little bit of deja vu. And, I think, honestly, the performance was very similar, too. I think you look at it and it's like, Jaylen Herz said this going into the game. And I think, looking back at it, it was very true. Like, teams have tried to, sell out and stop the run against the Eagles this year, but teams haven't really been able to do it. There have been a couple of examples where maybe teams had some success throughout during parts of a game, but Saquon usually does get, a handful of explosive runs. That offensive line in Saquon, they'll find pay dirt against most defenses, and that's what you saw against the Rams. I mean, they loaded the box plenty, but I think sometimes what you don't realize is when you load the box, you still have answers sometimes against that. Obviously, it's more challenging, but on the second touchdown run, I mean, they had a lot of guys up near the line of scrimmage. They called a run blitz, and Saquon they just had the perfect call for it. You see all the space that Saquon had. Even Jaylen Hertz's touchdown run earlier in the game was another example of the Rams did have a lot of players in the box. It's just a matter of can you win those matchups? Can you get off of blocks? And can you be in the right position? So I think that the Eagles have done such a great job of kind of figuring out the run game throughout each game. I think that that's a testament to Jeff Stoutland. Testament to the players too, though. Saquon mentioned his second touchdown run that he actually requested that play call. So, these guys have a really good feel for that, and they've been able to dominate because of, again, obviously it's individual talent, but it's also a good feel for what's going to work against certain teams.
Jaylen Carter once again in the middle of everything, as he usually is. I'm just going to come out and ask you, how good is he?
Yeah, I mean, what surprises me about him, honestly, obviously we knew coming out, when he came out of Georgia, that he was, a physical specimen, that he was, just a really special player. But the instincts that he has, the intelligence that he plays with really has surprised me this year. And, the funniest part about him is, typically you want your defensive linemen to rotate. But for him, honestly, I feel like, for an offensive lineman, any play that he's not on the field, you're relieved. Even if it's a fresh defensive tackle, you're still going to be relieved that you're not going up against Jaylen Carter. So he kind of has found his own advantage in being able to play, almost 70 snaps a game and, still wear guys down, but to the point where at the end of a game, he's just completely dominant. So honestly, that's one of the best defensive performances I've seen from a player, in my time covering the Eagles. I think it's fair to say that. And I think, as far as how good can he be, he's a, future defensive player of the year ceiling. I mean, I think, Aaron Donald just retired. I think that is the ceiling for Jaylen Carter. I think we got to pump the brakes before we get quite there. I mean, Aaron Donald is probably one of the greatest players of all time, but Jaylen Carter has that upside. He has the ability to just completely wreck games, and he plays a position that it's hard. Edge rushers you can account for a little bit in the pass game. You can do certain things to try and take them out of a game. It's really hard to take a defensive tackle out of a game, especially when you're a player like Jaylen Carter who can still defeat double teams. He can still work around, double teams in the interior. So how good is he? I mean, he's one of the best defensive players, in the league at this point. I think it's fair to say. And he has a feeling to be even more than that.
EJ, keeping it on the defensive side of the ball, obviously no Nakobe Dean. Not a perfect outing from the defense, but overall, how would you rate the replacements between Oren Burke and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. with Nakobe Dean out?
Yeah, we saw mostly Oren Burke. I thought he had a good game. I felt like going into the game, there was a lot of concern about how Sean McVay would try to isolate Oren Burks and then exploit the space around him. That's a trademark of these Rams teams. The McVay and Shanahan offenses are, especially difficult on linebackers. They typically will try to pick on linebackers, and I think Oren Burks, for the most part, was relatively solid. I didn't notice him being out of position too many times. I think they got him a couple of times, but for the most part, I thought he wasn't a liability. And honestly, that's what you ask for from a backup linebacker against the Sean McVay offense. Just don't be a liability. So, I think in general, I think the defensive performance was pretty solid. The offense didn't put them in favorable positions at certain points in the game. And realistically, holding a team to 22 points, I know that the conditions played a factor, but holding a team to 22 points in the playoffs, I think, is always going to be a testament to the defense being pretty solid. They made timely plays, which is something they've done all year. And honestly, they've been really opportunistic, which, again, that's the key. I mean, you look at all the games, over the weekend, and turnovers play such a big part in it. Obviously, the offense is doing well to limit turnovers, but the defense has really been effective forcing turnovers all year.
Well, believe it or not, we're still getting calls on Jaylen Herz isn't playing up to his potential and blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts on Jaylen's game yesterday and thoughts on these injuries?
Yeah, I thought he was up and down. I think the passing game is what it is at this point in the year. It's not, they don't have a lot of quick game answers against certain things. I think that I think there's two major concerns going into the next week. And I don't want to call them major, but, I think these are the last remaining questions that you have about this team. They're one of the final 4 teams standing there in the conference championship weekend. I think, and I wrote about this earlier today, evaluating, they have about a 35% chance of winning the Super Bowl by most odds. And, where does that 35% come from? They have mastered the art of not losing games. And I think, where does the 65% come from? I think it is questions about the passing game. I think it is questions about, if it's an unfavorable game script where they have to throw the ball, to chase a game, can they do it? I think the other thing is with Jaylen Herz, you mentioned the injuries. I think, that left knee injury that he suffered yesterday, this passing game looks a lot different if Jaylen Herz isn't his typical self in terms of athleticism. They rely so heavily on his ability to create out of structure. They rely heavily on his ability to just create in general. They don't have a, rhythmic passing game at this point. I think, in certain situations, that's not that big of a deal. They have enough talent to kind of figure it out. They have enough talent, and Jaylen is talented enough to, create things that maybe aren't there in the rhythm or in the, the design of the play. But if he is limited, if he is, not his usual self, I think that does put more strain or more pressure on the passing game to be, I guess, synchronized, for him to be able to get the ball out quickly. And I'm curious to see, what it looks like throughout the week of practice. Is he going to be out there? Is he going to look like himself? Because if he's not, I do wonder what the passing game is going to look like, with a less than 100% Jaylen Herz.
We're speaking with E.J. Smith. He does a tremendous job covering Eagles for the Inquirer, also a real filmsman. Let's talk about A.J. Brown for a moment. 0 drops all year, and then he has the 2 yesterday. Is this just a blip? Is this related to his injury? The reason I asked that is a lot of fans were telling us, and even some writers were saying, well, it's because he's playing hurt. Why do you think it's just one of those days because of the conditions? Why do you think A.J. Brown has some struggles hauling the ball in really for the first time all year yesterday?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to say he doesn't look quite right. Only he knows how close he is to 100%. I think there are times where he doesn't look hindered by the knee, but I think in general, the way that he's played the last 2 weeks, it's pretty uncharacteristic for him, and the fact that he is dealing with a knee injury that's kind of kept him in and out of practice. He's had days where he's limited. I think that is something you can't ignore. In general, though, I think it was kind of a fluky day for the receivers in general. I feel like Devontae had a couple of miscues as well. So, I don't think in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that the wide receiver performances are what I'd be worried about, in this upcoming weekend, and if they do advance and, the weeks after. But I do think with AJ, it is kind of, you would have expected him to have a big game yesterday. I feel like, typically when he has a quiet game like he did against the Packers, they try to get him involved early. They try to get him involved, throughout the game. And it just, for whatever reason, it just didn't look in sync between him and AJ, or Jaylen and AJ yesterday. So, yeah, I don't think I'm overly concerned with it. But, yeah, I definitely do think that it's fair to acknowledge the fact that he's been dealing with an injury and that he really hasn't looked right since that popped up.
How concerned are we about Quinyon Mitchell?
My colleague Olivia Ryder talked to him after the game, and he said he's fine. He said he doesn't think, the injury will, I guess jeopardize him for next weekend. But I think it's also important to remember, like, players will always, typically say that they're fine, even if maybe it is more serious. So I think we'll learn a lot Wednesday. I think the fact that he said he's fine probably is a good sign, but I think Wednesday will be probably more indicative, if he's limited in practice, if he's a full participant. But I think that he's got a chance of playing based off of what he said yesterday.
That's good news. EJ, we really appreciate the work. Will the breakdown be in the paper in the morning?
Yeah, it'll be on the website. I'm watching all kinds of stuff today. I'm watching the Commanders-Lions game. I'm watching the previous Eagles-Commanders game, and then obviously I'm watching the Eagles-Rams. So going through a lot of stuff. I'll have a preview, kind of, what each team should be preparing for going into this weekend. Appreciate it, EJ. Thanks so much. I'll always be checking that out. Appreciate the time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it. All right. That was EJ Smith on the Comcast Business Hotline.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching our YouTube. If you want to help us out, go ahead and like and subscribe for us. If you liked what you saw, go right over here to our playlists and pick out whatever you want to watch.